I didn't know what would happen in the future, good or bad, but I knew that alcohol was not going to be an option.
Welcome to Self-Made and Sober. I'm your host, Andrew Lassise with selfmade-coaching.com. And in this podcast, it's my job to interview people who are not only crushing it in business, but have also struggled with addiction in the past and are in long-term recovery. Be sure to join our Facebook group where we help entrepreneurs grow and scale their business at facebook.com/groups/SMC Mastermind, like Self-Made Coaching Mastermind. I hope you enjoy the show, and be sure to subscribe and rate the show afterwards so you can get notified each Friday when we put out a new episode. Welcome to the Self-Made and Sober podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lassise, and with me today is Jolene Park. You can find her on YouTube and view her TEDx Talk about the gray area drinker. Jolene, how are you?
I'm great. I'm honored to be here with you. Thanks for asking me on.
Yeah, definitely. And I believe I checked yesterday, you're up to 107,000 views on that TED Talk.
I am. It's crazy, but it's exciting. Yeah.
I think some people could probably guess what a gray area drinker is, but why don't you give us sort of a background of what a gray area drinker is and how it applied to your life?
Yeah, I certainly fell into this. I never would have imagined 10, 20 years ago that here I would be doing this work and talking about this. I was not a drinker early on in my life, ironically. And now this has become my work, and drinking came into my life in my late 20s. So I had a little bit of a different story than some, but I've certainly heard this story with many as well, that in growing up in high school and college, I just wasn't typically a lot of us have kind of that party background, college and that kind of thing. And I didn't, alcohol, it just kind of wasn't a thing for me one way or the other. And so went through the early part of my life not drinking. But then in my late 20s, I went through a breakup, which I was just devastated about. And remember very clearly, sitting down, I'd had wine at home. Like I'd gotten it at a work conference one time, and I was just kind of using it like as a decorative thing, on my counter in my kitchen for months. And I was like, screw it. I'm just going to sit down and open this bottle of wine. It was really conscious. Like I'm in pain. I'm in grief. I'm going to open the bottle of wine. And I did. And there was something very different kind of in that moment. Like, I had a glass and I was like, whoo, this just kind of like stopped that ruminating mind, the pain that has been in my mind. And it just calmed it down. I'm like, why have I not done this before? And I had certainly drank before over the years, but it just didn't kind of click one way or the other. I could take it or leave it. But in that moment, when I was in that heightened kind of grief and pain, something different clicked for me. And that's where it began. And my late 20s, I actually started then my own entrepreneurial business, my consulting company, when I was 31. And so it all correlated really, really quickly. And I just, and I drank through my 30s, and I was in the entrepreneurial world. I was in the business world. My friend group, it was the kind of the single 30s. We had disposable income. We were out frequently, like, let's try this new restaurant, kind of the foodie scene, which was always very much mixed with alcohol. And that was how I started drinking. But it was very connected from the very beginning of, I just want to shut my mind off with whatever it was, with a relationship I was stressed about, with running my business that I was stressed about, worried about money. And it was like, I've got this sophisticated bottle of wine. I'm going to have a glass. I'm just going to have a glass. And as soon as I would have that first glass, it'd be like, oh, screw it. Whether I poured it or I ordered it, I'll have another. And then I'll have another. And how then easy it was to just finish that bottle. And as the years went on a more, at first it was just kind of the weekend. Like, okay, it's the weekend, I'm going to drink the bottle of wine. And then, as it went on, it was very easy most days to be doing that. And so, what it was for me, kind of back to this whole gray area, when I stopped drinking, I didn't go to treatment. I was able I had the capacity and ability to say, I'm not going to drink. And I didn't drink and I stopped. But I also wasn't, having a glass of champagne on New Year's Eve and then not thinking about it or not drinking again for weeks or months. So there's kind of those two extremes of, not really drinking. It's just not kind of a thing in your life like it was for me in the early years. It truly wasn't. And then more of that other extreme where we stereotypically kind of put people like, well, I'm not that bad. And that bar moves all the time, no pun intended, of what that bad is. And I wasn't kind of in either one of those categories, but where I was in the middle of those categories, which then I started talking about it's the gray area. And it was also, so many women around me. It was when I was going to book clubs, the girls' night out, the kind of the suburban neighborhood, the mommy juice culture of let's have some wine. We're not, where people are like, well, you're not an alcoholic. This is how everybody drinks. But the way we were drinking was very, very problematic. The way I was drinking was very problematic. And that's the gray area.
In your life, no one was really like hounding you. Jolene, you need to cut back. Jolene, every time you drink, everything gets ruined. Everybody's life is worse because of your drinking. You were just kind of in this area where inside at least, what you're doing is not the way that it's supposed to be, but you weren't necessarily getting the outside, consequences and the outside reinforcement. Like for me, my parents, they would say, hey, we know you've been drinking, which didn't even make sense because I wasn't drinking in front of them. But they would say, maybe you should lay off it a bit. And my friends and my roommates is, okay, Andrew, you're going to be drinking tonight, but why don't you just cut yourself off at like 9? And it never panned out. But I was hearing from other people, you need to tone it down. You need to tone it down. But that wasn't your experience. Your experience was keep doing what you're doing.
Exactly. Yeah. And I was never kind of known as like the party girl who, the group that I hung out with, I actually, people drank much bigger amounts than I did. So I fit in very well. I didn't stand out as like, oh, Jolene, she gets a little out of control. It wasn't like my behavior changed. I wasn't an angry drunk or that kind of thing. The one kind of external thing that I knew deep in my gut that I was on borrowed time is I would drive a lot. So I live in Denver, Colorado, and it was pre-Uber. Because I'm coming up on 5 years of not drinking. So Uber and Lyft kind of got their popularity around the time when I stopped drinking.
Yeah, same.
And, and it wasn't like I was blackout driving. It was that thing of everybody knows, this, like, I'm okay. But if I ever got stopped or if something ever happened, how my life would have just completely shifted in the snap of a fingers. And that worried me. And I always knew in the back of my mind, how I was. So that was kind of the negative thing that didn't happen, but there was no reason it couldn't have happened. But no, beyond that, there was nothing that kind of stood out. But the way I was drinking was problematic. Finishing a bottle of wine very frequently, very easily, at the end, pretty much most nights. There's nothing about that that's normal. There's nothing about that that's healthy or within range of, good. Although there's many people who are like, well, that's not a problem. Like, I'm just getting started with a bottle.
I just like to have a bottle of wine with dinner, right. for the antioxidants. Or
right.
My excuse, I was working my way up the Carrabba's ladder, and I was in charge of training the new employees on the wines that we had. So when I would go to the liquor store and drink wine, I would buy the wines that Carrabba's had, and I would just be taking it to the face, drinking it in the name of research and being good at my job. That was my excuse, was, well, this is for work. That's why I need to drink this bottle.
I get it. And I'm a functional nutritionist. I certified in nutrition in 1999. And have, a lot of my ongoing training, I've done a lot of continuing education training, these weekend conferences, these functional medicine conferences. And early on, this is like 2002, 2004, there was a lot of talk, we're going through we're talking about fish oil and omega-3 fats and, improving your gut health and that kind of thing. And we talk about, like you say, resveratrol and the antioxidant effects. And certainly, red wine, it would come up of, a glass of red wine can have those the resveratrol, but, as can grapes and white grape juice and all that. And then we go out and have these kind of decadent dinners of like, okay, we've just talked about all the benefits of amino acids and let's have a good steak and some vegetables and a glass of red wine. So it was even, in that industry held up and revered, but, a glass. However, at that dinner table, we're also ordering bottles and bottles and bottles of red wine, which for me also kind of made it acceptable of, that's, part of my training, but there's that slippery line then of a glass to a bottle or more.
Mm-hmm. So when you get sober at the end of 2014, was there any sort of moment where it was like, this is the end? Or were you just kind of, time to get sober, I suppose? What's going on early December 2014?
I was sick and tired of living the same Groundhog Day over and over and over. So for years, really kind of through that decade of drinking, it was through my 30s. I stopped a lot. I would get in these cycles where I would drink and it would escalate. The more I drank, the more it escalated. And then I'd kind of hit this period of like, all right, I just got to like stop and kind of clean this up. And I'd go back to the nutrition side, which I could hide behind a little bit. Like, I'm going to do a paleo challenge, which meant I'm not drinking for 30 days. What was really happening. But, and so I would do that many times. I did a yoga training and I didn't drink for 18 months. It was a yoga practice that, they were pretty vocal about bringing it. The alcohol brings down your vibration and part of, doing this yoga, alcohol is really not part of it. And I was like, okay, again, I had that capacity to stop, but then I would be like, what am I doing? Like, I can be a social drinker. Like, it's not, I want to be able to have a glass of wine. And so I would go back and I did that as many, many times over the years, back and forth. And it's exhausting. And the misery of going back into, having this period of not drinking and things are just better across the board. And then I would start drinking and kind of fall back in that pit again. Everything would start to, just how I felt physically and emotionally. I just was not kind of that effective person that I wanted to be. I functioned. It was all, everything was going okay, but yet internally it was much more suboptimal. And so I just got so sick of that back and forth. And there was this period in December 2014, another relationship, because it's very tied for me with relationships, that initial pain in my late 20s. And I would actually find I would drink more when I get into relationships, almost as kind of like I was buffering like, when's the shoe going to drop, and kind of that numbing protection. I would date guys who were big drinkers also. And so I didn't stand out as being a big drinker. So in 2014, I had just gotten out of another relationship that we were both drinking heavily. And it was just like, what I want. And I would hang out with girlfriends. Like, there's just no available men. Like, I want this relationship. And they're drinking. And then it was like, I'm pointing one finger out, there's three fingers pointing back at me. Mm-hmm. And if this is what I'm really wanting, and it's like, here's this pattern that has been running for so many years, I just can't keep doing this with relationships, with the way I was drinking. And I didn't plan to quit. It wasn't like this is going to be my last, drinking day, but it was after kind of a week of just drinking every day, got to that Sunday after drinking on Saturday and was just felt so sick and was just like, I'm just done. And there was just something like deep in my bones that just knew. And I went through scenarios. I remember very clearly, and I opened my TEDx talk talking about this, that I was driving down the highway, hungover this time, not not drunk, but it was, Monday, Tuesday, after that Saturday, my last drinking day. And I was just mentally going through these scenarios of like, is this really it? Like, I was kind of having this conversation back and forth, and I was like, but what if in the future I meet, this guy, I wasn't dating anybody, but some guy in the future, and we go to Italy on this romantic holiday, am I really not going to drink? And I was asking myself this question. I was like, no, I'm done. I'm done. And then it was like, what if something really awful happens? Like, the phone call comes at 2 a.m. That's just devastating. And whatever that is, like, a death of somebody really close to me. Am I really then going to go through those days? Like, it's going to be so hard and painful, and not just kind of numb that with alcohol. And I'm like, no, and so I had, because I had stopped and started so many times, I knew, I'd been through hard things. I'd been through holidays. I'd been through it. And I really just had to come to Jesus, talk with myself. Is this really it? And I was like, this is really it. And I was very resolute. I didn't know what would happen in the future, good or bad. But I knew that alcohol was not going to be an option. And this December will be my 5-year anniversary. I have not had a drink since that day.
That's incredible. And I know for myself, my wife and I'd say I have a couple of some of the top times that someone should drink that I didn't. And just for people that are kind of like on the fence, like, can I, can't I? We got engaged on St. Patrick's Day in Dublin.
Wow.
Didn't drink. We went on our honeymoon in Italy. 2 weeks. Didn't drink. I was at the table with a 7-figure negotiation. Everybody else was drinking. I didn't drink. So there's that. You can come up with any excuse, but I can tell you in all of those situations, it wasn't something where, and I mean, I had been sober several years at the time when these events happened. So it's not like, well, I got sober March 23rd and then I was faced with all these temptations on the 27th. But these things, you start to build up that foundation and you start to take it in internally that I am a sober person, and a sober person does not drink on these occasions. And I mean, for you now, I'm sure you probably embody it more than ever with your TED Talk and with the programs that you're putting out, where that is your identity. It's not just, I'm trying this 30-day paleo. It is, I'm Jolene Park, a person that doesn't drink, period. Here are the things that solidify that in my subconscious, which probably makes it easier for you to stop because it is part of who you are. And for myself also with, this podcast, it makes it a lot more difficult for me to go out and drink when it's like, aren't you the guy that has the podcast about sobriety? And I know some of the other big podcasts, and I've had guests on the show. I know Shane Raymer, that sober guy, that was part of his motivation. I believe Paul Churchill with Recovery Elevator, I think that was his motivation as well. They were early in sobriety and like, hey, here's an extra layer of accountability. So moving forward, though, how did you get into the speaking scene, and how did the TED Talk kind of unveil? What were the steps that you took to make that happen?
Well, so my background is in public speaking. I have been working in corporate wellness since 2004. And actually my degree from college is speech communication. So emphasizing public speaking, corporate training, group facilitation. It's always been my love, and it's always been the work, that I've done. I never would have imagined that I would do a TED Talk on alcohol and drinking, particularly my drinking story. I've always known about TED Talks, but so that's kind of that thing of, life takes you in strange directions. But I do feel like the 15 minutes on that TED stage was kind of all the work that I've been doing led me to that with my public speaking. So how it came about was I didn't start talking about not drinking until about a year and a half into not drinking. Of course, personally, friends and family knew because I was the red wine drinker. And now all of a sudden, like we're out to dinner and they're like, Jolene, why are you not having a glass of red wine? So they obviously knew immediately. But professionally, I just kept doing what I was doing. I was doing health coaching and teaching, ironically, wellness classes. But I also was at that time teaching about brain chemistry, talking a lot about sugar and the different neurotransmitters, GABA, serotonin, dopamine. I'd learned all about that in my functional nutrition training in 2006 was when I did that training. And so I incorporated that with my work. But it wasn't until I quit drinking kind of a year and a half into being alcohol free that then I started being kind of public about, okay, look, this is my story. And I quit drinking, and I was listening to the motivation to start talking was I was listening to podcasts, some alcohol-free podcasts where people were talking about it. And I was listening, and I'm like, I just feel like something's being missed here. And what's being missed is the physiology. And, it's still like people like Holly Whitaker and Laura McCowan, they were doing great things and really kind of blowing the doors off the stigma of, not drinking and like Holly doesn't go to AA. And so there was like this whole kind of follow who was resonating with that. But I was like, there's this piece of neurotransmitters and blood sugar and what I had always known and studied, and which really, helped me and what I stuck to early on in not drinking was going back to the physiology for myself. And I was just like, I just feel like people need to know that. So I wrote to Holly and Laura who do the home podcast. And I said, look, I think there's something, missing piece. And I just thought that email would, get lost in a sea of other emails. And they replied and they said, come on our show. We'd love to have you talk about this. And so that's then what opened up. I told my story and connected it with a lot of the nutrition, the physiology, the nervous system regulation. Then I started to kind of get known for that. And then a year later, I applied to do the TED Talk on neurotransmitters and the physiology. So it was a bit of kind of there were some steps in there, but the more I started talking about it, I realized how much people were like, this is, really fascinating. And this is me. And I want to hear more about this brain chemistry piece.
And you talked a bit about it on the TED Talk, but do you want to kind of go over the GABA and serotonin and how that all plays into while you're drinking?
Yeah. So, I sit very much in the physiology camp. So as a nutritionist, my training, my background, what's so interesting to me and when I look at the neuroscience of it is we talk about, it starts with the body and then it's the brain is the second. And traditionally, we try to like cognitively, and my clients will tell me this. They're like, I know this stuff. I listen to it. I read it. Like, I know it. Why do I keep drinking? And the data is that we have to body first, brain second. So when the body feels calm, when the body's resourced, when the body is in homeostasis, then it gives the message up to the brain, okay, we don't need to fight. We don't need to flee. We don't need to go into freeze mode, and the brain can calm down. So working with the body and some of those just foundational pieces is working with the neurochemicals in the body, not the cognitive piece, because we're working with an animal brain. And so when animals are, freaked out or scared, like if there's a dog that's lost its owner and it's running across, traffic, that dog doesn't understand language. But what its body understands sensation and calming that dog's body. And we're the same way. We have this animal body. And when we are stressed in this like triggered, activated fight, flight, freeze state, which is usually, when we want to drink, we want to like try to regulate that. For me to say, well, just calm down and don't drink, that doesn't register. But what registers is doing something to regulate the body. And momentarily, a drink, a glass of alcohol feels like we're regulating the body. It's a physical thing. The liquid of alcohol going into our physical body, we get that regulation. And so we need to then start there with how can we regulate the body physically? Because we're doing it with alcohol. How can we do it physically, but with something besides alcohol? And so, particularly looking at nutrients and foods and movements and lifestyle practices to go right into the root very quickly, and that root being our GABA neurotransmitter, which is responsible for anxiety. If it's too low, we feel more anxious. And a lot of people will say they drink because they feel anxious. The serotonin neurotransmitter can be connected with depression. And then dopamine is connected with connection. We want to connect with others. So, people will say, I drink because I want to relax or I want to connect. And so it's often those neurotransmitters are literally low. We can test them and they're low, and we're trying to regulate. We're trying to medicate and boost them up with alcohol. So now when we understand the physiology of what else can regulate and boost our internal pharmacy of that anti-anxiety, kind of antidepressant, that connection hormone, that dopamine is also about our motivation and our drive. When we learn how to regulate that, it's first of all, it's fun to know about. It can be inspiring. It's a different shift. It's a different reframe from something's wrong with me and I, just personality-wise have a moral defect, because our physiology regulates our psychology. It's like when we have the flu. If we don't feel well physically, we don't feel well emotionally or mentally. So going in and working with the physiology is where I start, and it's what has really helped me and what has helped my clients.
What would be kind of the ideal diet for somebody? I'm sure a lot of it plays into the diet that you have. So if you take in a ton of sugar, I'm assuming that that's not good for you. If someone were to stick to a regimen of a perfect intake in their body, what would that look like? Supplements, diet? I know it'll fluctuate person to person, but in a ballpark, if you could kind of give someone the shortcut of, if you do this, you'll be okay.
Well, taking alcohol out's the first step. And I knew that, this was another part of that 2014 kind of moment of knowing, is I knew this physiology work. And it was kind of like, I can't keep not knowing what I know and ignoring this. Like it was too misaligned. I knew about the physiology. I knew what havoc alcohol played on hormones, on brain chemicals. So alcohol is just a dirty drug. I mean, it just sweeps GABA, dopamine, serotonin, acetylcholine, your oxytocin, your cortisol. It just does a sweep on all of them, and lowers everything and dysregulates everything. So taking alcohol out biochemically, physiology-wise, is the best thing you can do. And so, whatever the struggle is, whether it's sleep or your mood or your weight or, anything, alcohol disrupts all of that. So taking that out of the picture is huge. And then going back to just kind of, diet and nutrition, our body needs protein, carbohydrates, and fat. And we want the secret sauce. Like we want to be like, what's the rock we haven't turned over? It's going back to the basics. That makes the biggest difference. So eating protein, and the reason why protein is so important is because any protein that you eat, whether it's animal-based or vegetable-based, will break down into amino acids. And amino acids are the raw materials that make GABA, dopamine, and serotonin. So eating protein every time you eat, it's not just like, oh, I say it and it's a healthy thing to say. It really, like, that's what's fascinating about physiology, like how it starts to connect and when the rubber really meets the road. So protein is key. If you're just stopping drinking, if have stopped, but you're just like, oh, my mood, my sleep, go back to protein every time you eat, and eat 3 times a day. Like, it's simple, but a lot of people just don't do it, but it makes a really, really big difference. And not just like subjectively, like I'm just talking about this, you can see it on blood labs. So when you eat 3 times a day and eat some protein in those 3 meals, blood lab starts to shift. Like blood glucose starts to regulate, triglycerides can, regulate a little bit more, the cortisol, the DHEA, stress hormone. So we can measure it, and it's simple. Eat regularly, eat some protein. And then the next nutrition thing is the good healthy fat, particularly omega-3 fats, because those omega-3 fats also feed your brain, the GABA, the serotonin, the dopamine. So omega-3 fats are fish oil, flax seeds, chia seeds, but also the other good fats, coconut oil, real butter, olive oil, avocado, that kind of thing. And then we need carbohydrates for energy, for our brain. to be able to process information, to not, low blood sugar, high blood sugar. We want to keep the brain blood sugar level. And vegetables are the ideal carbohydrates, and then fruit. Depending on, the person's goal, what their symptoms are, what they're trying to achieve. Some people can tolerate more starchy, grainy, floury carbohydrates. But, the real whole grains are quinoa, brown rice, steel-cut oats, amaranth. Whole grains aren't always just whole wheat. Whole wheat is a whole grain, but getting the other whole grains in. And then the third category of carbohydrates is alcohol and soda and brownies and candy bars and cookies. And so when people say to me, I'm not eating carbs, does that mean you're not eating cookies, or are you not eating broccoli? So ideally, it's just going back to the basics, getting in good protein, whatever protein you like, getting in good healthy fats, and adding in fruits and vegetables. So for me, it's about adding in instead of taking away. Because normally when we talk nutrition, people are like, oh, geez, what do I have to not eat, take away, deprive myself of? And it's actually just, we need to focus, I think, more on adding in the actual food, because that's what we're missing.
And do you think there's any good strategies for going about that? Like for myself, I know if I pre-plan my meals and meal prep, then it's a lot more difficult for me to stray when, I guess it's that animal brain that you're talking about, where I just walk downstairs and there's the trigger of, I am hungry at this moment. Open the refrigerator. What is inside of the refrigerator? Here is food. Be it good or bad, I am looking for food. I haven't made a conscious decision. My animal brain, I know in the moment I shouldn't choose a brownie. But at the same time, it's like, well, I don't face an immediate consequence with it, so just one won't hurt. And I think we can kind of tie that into the alcoholic brain as well. Like you said, you didn't get a DUI. You didn't injure somebody as a result of drinking and driving. And that was my experience as well. Well, actually, I take that back. I hit some cars and got a DUI. So not the same. But 99% of the time, it worked out. It worked out fine. And there wasn't anything negative that happened as a direct result. But are there any strategies for strategies for stopping yourself or keeping on track?
Yeah, I mean, this could be a 3-hour workshop, because what I just talked about, protein, carbohydrates, fat, if it were as simple as that, the conversation would be over. But it's not that simple. And there's a lot of layers to this, and there's a long conversation and to what you're bringing up. So sugar and alcohol run the same pathway in the brain. They're very similar. We switch. So often, and this was me, I was, my issue early on, I wasn't a drinker, but sugar was an issue for me in my teens and my 20s. And then I discovered alcohol, and I'm like, what am I doing? Like, alcohol is just a quick route. It's immediate. Like, why am I wasting time eating sugar? But then often people will quit alcohol, go back to sugar. And you said, I know I shouldn't eat a brownie. This is like what people say. They're like, I know this stuff. I know this about alcohol, but why can't I stop? So again, it's not about intellectually knowing things. It's about working with our physiology. So quick and simple. I mean, like you said, I think there is something, if you just don't have it in your environment, that could be one just quick kind of hack, to just not have things in your cupboards and that kind of thing. But it's also not about deprivation. So it's not also that, this thing of like all this stuff you can't have. So then it's going to, looking at kind of the deeper layers. One brownie here and there, is it going to kill you? No, absolutely not. So what's the goal? Like what is it that you're trying to go after? And food can get really tangled with this kind of, this is bad food. We have so much. I mean, if we had the judgment on alcohol, on that alcohol is bad, the way we have the judgment on a brownie is bad. I mean, there's just this thing of like these bad foods. And then there's this, it equals, if we put that bad food, however we define a bad food, in our body, now we're bad. And that's where it gets tangled and really messy. And it's just not true. I mean, one brownie, is it going to knock you off your diet? No, not at all. But going back to, first of all, what's your why? And then there's just a lot of layers under this of like, what are we really hungry for? What's the void that we're really trying to fill? And could it be that we're just, lack of connection, or we're needing more space and solitude, more creativity? And that's a lot of what I work with clients, getting to kind of that core void or core need, because we could drink all the alcohol in the world or eat all the brownies in the world, and that's not what's going to fill that void. But we need to get to, uncover, what are we really trying to feed here?
Mm-hmm. So understanding the root, it helps you to understand what the symptoms are, and there's usually something deeper is kind of what we're trying to medicate with all those, the things that we're putting in our body or the decisions that we're making. A lot of it, I believe it's a Tony Robbins, it's we know what to do, we don't do what we know. And that's where someone like yourself as a coach helps put people, give them the accountability and the guidance, but it's not always just the intellectual. A lot of it, there's the fear-based also, and entrepreneurs, people trying to start their own business. And I know that I need to do this, 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 and this. And it's like, okay, just go do that. And it's like, well, what if I fail? And you already know what to do. Just go do it. And my company, we're going through some gigantic acquisition and this and that. And, we're talking about big scary numbers on an animal level. My reaction, they say a number and I say, oh, that's way too much. And then you break it down and it's like, well, that's like 3 days of sales. Like, is that really so much, or is it just your instinct? And if you can get through on the cognitive level of, if I can tell myself that this isn't scary because of these facts, it can kind of help how you feel with any sort of situation that you're trying to overcome. But we had talked briefly before the show. Do you want to talk about Sober Choice? And at the time of this release, it'll be pretty brand new. But would you like to give people a couple details on what it is and what you're looking to accomplish with it and how they can get involved?
Absolutely. I just released a new online program called the Sober Choice, and it takes people through the first 30 days. So you have me digitally, and I've recorded videos to really address kind of, the concerns of, I just stopped drinking, but now I'm really craving sugar or carbohydrates. And in an 8 to 19 minute video, they're really quick. Here's I go through, look at this, here's a resource, here's an action step, here's your follow through. And I address all the things of like, I just don't know if this whole forever question, got a whole day on that. Sober sex, and hanging out with, my friends still drink, but I've quit. And, just kind of staying on track and all these things that come up, and delivering it, which actually the resources and the action steps tie in with entrepreneurship. Because, keeping your blood sugar stable, working with building your resilience, that ability to tolerate the discomfort, that's what's in this program, which you can apply. And I say on day 30 of this program, all of this it's not like you just did it on day 16 and then never look at it again. These are life techniques to help you maintain and sustain your sober choice. And so it's just really, I'm a real practical person. Like, when I'm in a class or not the teacher, I'm like, just give me the how and tell me why it works. And so that's how I've set this up. And that's how I teach it. And it correlates, and you transfer it with kind of any life anxiety that might be going on, whether it's business or relationships. When people talk about, this is my trigger to drink, this course is all of kind of the resources to get through those triggers.
That's incredible. Well, Jolene, thank you so much for being on the Self-Made and Sober podcast. And where can people find you to learn more about you? What are your social medias? And we'll have links in the show notes for all of these.
So grayareadrinkers.com is where all the coaching and programs. I also train other coaches and healthcare practitioners how to work with gray area drinkers. So that's all on that website. My Instagram is where I am mostly on social. And it's healthy _ discoveries, because that's the name of my original corporate wellness training company.
All right, perfect. We'll have links for all of that. And guys, if you enjoyed the show,
Comment on the Facebook page, review it on iTunes. Let your friends know about everything that you're going through. Message me personally. Message Jolene. Get in touch with her. She's a great resource. Be sure to check out her TED Talk. Check out her programs. And Jolene, thank you so much for being on Self-Made and Sober.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to Self-Made and Sober. Be sure to join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/SMC Mastermind, like Self-Made Coaching Mastermind. I hope you enjoyed the show, and be sure to subscribe and rate the show so you can get notified each Friday when we put out a new episode.